to members of the committee for inviting my testimony today. My name is Sonia Strobel, and I bring a few different perspectives to this study into the impacts of foreign ownership and corporate concentration of fishing licenses and quotas, and I'll try to focus my remarks in areas that haven't been covered by other witnesses already. So the first perspective I bring is as a fishing family. I married into the fisheries in BC over 20 years ago and have witnessed the same struggles that you've heard from other harvesters. We couldn't afford to buy the licenses in our family, and so now every year my husband leases. And he faces the same uncertainty as thousands of other harvesters who lease licenses. For many, leased licenses come with conditions around whom they must sell to and for what price. They take on the lion's share of the risk setting up for the season, and yet they have no agency over the market for their catch. Fishing is inherently uncertain, but disproportionately so for small-scale independent harvesters in BC. Uncertainty around whether or not you'll even be able to fish is something that our friends and colleagues on the East Coast inshore fleet never even have to think about. As you've heard from other witnesses, this is in no small part because of the extent of corporate concentration of licenses designed to control both access to the resource and the price. Some will say that the DFO's beneficial ownership survey will provide evidence that there are no monopolies in fishing in Canada. And the survey may indeed make it appear that way. But be careful what conclusions you draw, because the survey is studying the wrong thing. The reality is more nuanced than just who owns a license or quota on paper. Corporations don't have to own all the quota to control it. And I can provide a general example of this if we have time during questions. Anyone working with the industry knows this, but will be cautious about speaking publicly about it for fear of repercussions. The point is that in BC, even many of the few remaining owner-operators aren't independent. They can't sell their catch to the highest bidder, and they have no agency over their enterprises. My second perspective is as a seafood consumer. Before marrying into a fishing family, I rarely ate seafood because it was next to impossible to get local seafood in my coastal community of Vancouver, even though I was watching the offload of some of the most abundant, well-managed seafood in some of the cleanest water in the world. I later found out that in Canada we export about 90% of what we catch, and at the same time about 80% of the seafood Canadians consume is imported. The pandemic and subsequent supply chain shocks laid bare just how vulnerable our food system is. It's a simple fact that the average Canadian can scarcely access Canadian seafood, and the seafood they can buy often comes from fisheries with far worse environmental and human rights track records than Canadian seafood. And concentration of licenses and quotas into fewer and fewer export-oriented hands is a big part of the problem. Thirdly, my perspective is as a small business owner. My husband and I started Skipper Otto community-supported fishery in 2008 to de-risk fishing for fishing families and to provide direct access to Canadian seafood for Canadians. Since then, we've grown from supplying the fish from one family, my father-in-law Otto, to 45 fishing families in BC and Nunavut, and to providing their catch directly to over 8,000 home cooks across the country, from Victoria to Ottawa. There is significant growing demand from both the supply side and the demand side of our business. Because of our lean direct-to-consumer model, we pay fishing families more than they can get anywhere else. As a result, we have more demand from harvesters than we can meet. And because we provide the most fisher direct, transparent seafood in Canada, there's huge demand from consumers across the country as well. Ultimately, what this whole issue of foreign ownership and corporate consolidation comes down to is that the Government of Canada has privatized access to the commons. And there's a good reason why we don't privatize, for example, our national parks. They're a common resource for all Canadians. And sure, big companies could make a fine go of providing services in parks and charging admission, but we don't go for that because it wouldn't equally benefit all Canadians. Foreign ownership and corporate concentration of licenses and quotas privatizes the commons. It takes away the power of the boots-on-the-deck fishing families, and it de-risks an inherently risky industry for the big players while placing the risk squarely on the shoulders of the little guy. If we care about retaining the social, cultural, and economic benefits of the fisheries in our Indigenous, rural, and coastal fishing communities, then the Government of Canada must tackle foreign ownership and corporate consolidation alongside a made-in-BC fleet separation and owner-operator policy. So thank you for your time, Mr. Chair, and to the members, and I'll be pleased to answer questions.